I'm Dana Loesch in for Glenn tonight. It's a curious thing how progressives assume that those of us who subscribe to the principles laid bare in the founding documents are somehow narrow in our thinking. Our founders diverted from the classical views held by Greek and Roman philosophers that government is a natural event. To the contrary, our founders, as evidenced by their written words, believed that government was entirely a man-made creation, a necessity of civility to combat the errant nature of man. The Constitution is a punk rock anthem, the first punk rock anthem, before the Dickies, before the Bad Brains, and of course, one of my favorites, the Ramones. It's a perfect amalgam of American spirit with an anti-authoritative, managed chaos aesthetic. Progressives prize European democracy and hive-mind mob rule, an unenlightened form of government practiced by countries who still worship sovereigns and bear vestiges of stifling doctrines. Our country chose to put the rights of man out of everyone's reach, but that of his own and God's. Our country refused to allow a singular denomination to dominate government, unlike England, which to this day has done little more than talk of dissolving the ban on Catholic members of the monarchy. Our country was one of the first to abolish slavery, to elect a leader of color. Our country is the most counterculture punk rock country on the planet, and a bunch of squares for the man are trying to crush that spirit. Speaking of which, have you noticed just how square Hollywood has gotten? My mom was a hardworking single mom, and as a result, I spent a lot of time with her sister, herself a stay-at-home mom, and her family. I was in about 6th or 7th grade when a big debate broke out in their house one night about explicit lyrics in songs. Tipper Gore had ticked off one of my cousin's favorite artists, Twisted Sister, and Tipper wanted to assume the parents' roles and warn children away from naughty lyrics with explicit stickers. Except that wasn't her job. Democrats championed the move. Decency standards, you see. I know, the same government that sanctioned female genocide, abortion, has an aversion to certain dirty words. You know, I thought at the time, why is this self-claimed party of rock and roll trying to censor lyrics? I tried explaining this shift to a younger member of my family a couple of weeks ago. The left, I told him, are the modern-day flat-earthing book burners. They are the nation's hall monitors. They are the ladies at homecoming who push apart the couples that they deem are dancing too close together. They are the people demanding that we shill for more authority. These progressives protest for more government and health care while simultaneously screeching, "My body, my choice!" So it's not only square, but it's stupid, too. They are people like Tipper Gore, who think that the government has the authority to say children need their parents' permission to buy a certain CD or download an album, but not to get an abortion. No. They are the people that, when picked last in dodgeball, they'll come up with a law regulating the dodgeball selection process. They are the litigious squares who will sue dissent into silence, who demand less diversity, not more, on the airwaves. They're the Nancy Pelosi's, the Chuck Schumers, the Barack Obamas of the world, and their messages are broadcast throughout the country 24/7 by Hollywood. Freedom bad, slavery to centralized government good. They just remade Dallas, a show that I watched with my grandma as a kid. Used to love that show. Correct me if I'm wrong, which I'm not, that's rhetorical, but I don't recall JR ever shaking in his boots over fracking the earth apart, or ever being a wind farmer. Even T. Boone Pickens got out of that business. Hooray for Hollywood! It's not rage against the machine, it's be a cog in the machine. And these are the people whom we're up against. Last week, my family took our second vacation in 12 years, and we went to Oahu. And during the week, we visited Pearl Harbor. Now, my grandfather was a gunner on the USS Alabama, and he was invited aboard the USS Missouri to witness General Douglas MacArthur sign the peace treaty with Imperial Japan. It was a really sobering experience to stand there and imagine that peaceful, beautiful harbor. It was ablaze almost 71 years ago. It was a really trying time for our country and the first test of our superpower strength. And inside the museum, there were a number of war posters. government propaganda for the war effort. Now, my favorite include the posters of the women who were just throwing themselves at the brave men who had just signed up for battle, and the PSAs, which spoke to the women about rationing for our boys in blue. It wasn't, though, our government really needed to churn out propaganda. They didn't. They didn't need to do that to influence public opinion. The culture recognized evil as evil and good as good, and they saw an immediate threat which required elimination. It was the greatest generation placed in that time to deal with the biggest threat we'd faced since the tyranny of King George. Society now tells you that good and evil, they're not black and white, but that there exist gray areas. Thursday's Supreme Court ruling showed us all that America is again facing the most trying time since World War II. The last guard of the Constitution sided with the current president, and that the government is free to force any action, any behavior upon you as it deems fit, so long as it calls it a tax. Democrats like the court's ruling on Obama tax, so they'll abide. But they dislike the court's ruling on Arizona's immigration law, so they'll just ignore it. The White House has just told you that the Supreme Court doesn't matter. The future of our country, not just a presidential election, will be decided in November. We can either change course or we will stay on this path to destruction. I thought about all of this while standing on the bow of the mighty Mo, gazing at those massive guns. Do we have it within us, another great generation, to rise up in November and remove tyranny from the White House? To speak bluntly, we are in this situation because my generation and the generation before me lived off the credit earned from another generation's valor. Now it's our turn. And how will we be able to effectively combat this erosion of liberty when so many on our side still disregard the truth that politics is downstream from pop culture? We're never going to change the politicians unless you change the people. Take Massachusetts, for instance. Scott Brown is the most conservative politician you're going to get in that district, unless you change the hearts and minds of the people. Elected office is still a reflection of who we are. It's a very uncomfortable truth. And if we're unhappy with this reflection, we need to work harder to change it. And this doesn't begin with campaigns. It begins with entertainment and academics. If you wait until an election cycle to try to effect change, you're too late. If you think that one election cycle is all it will cost to turn the country around, you're naive. And if you think that you can do any of this without focusing on where the seeds of ideas are sown, you're clueless. Selling liberty isn't hard, and it shouldn't be. How many of you know who the conservatives are in Hollywood? They're there. Most of them keep their ideology in the shadows. The ones who come out either as conservatives or libertarians, they're mostly blacklisted. Do you know that Hollywood has no power to blacklist, but you do? You give Hollywood its power. These conservative celebs, they're not going to come out until you realize it, though. They need your support, even the not-so-famous ones. How often do you attend an art show? A concert? How often do you watch the Oscars? If you've the inclination to brush it off as a non-essential, please remember that's the exact sort of thinking that got us into this mess. Why is it that progressives, whose ideology is built around leeching off the productive, are allowed to be characterized as creative, while conservatives, the people who actually create, are called uncreative? Because art and entertainment tells us so? And we let it stand because we don't contest it with our dollars? You know, what was the last really good pro-America, good is good, evil is evil movie you saw? The one I saw was Iron Man. I felt like lifting my hands to the sky watching that movie. I liked it so much I saw it twice. Also loved The Expendables. I heard Vince Vaughn was one of us, and so now I go and see every single one of his movies. I interviewed Jesse Hughes from Eagles of Death Metal and discovered he was a conservative, so I went out and bought all his albums, plus it's really good music. And The Army You Have, a great indie band that also happens to be conservative. Fantastic. Here's a lesson, though, for conservative artists. As Des Dickerson told me, and he played guitar for Prince, be judged on the merit of your work, not because of your ideology. Make your art beyond reproach. Going out and buying crappy art from someone just because they're a conservative is as disingenuous as what Hollywood is doing right now. It's not conservative to expect other conservatives to like your work because you are also a conservative. It's hypocritical to feel this way because then you're telling progressives, don't judge me because of my politics, while also simultaneously telling conservatives, please judge me because of my politics. Yeah, all of the stuff that I mentioned, the movies, the music, that stuff rocks already. That they're conservatives or done by conservatives, it's all icing on the cake. It's a progressive mentality to think that you're owed something. We are conservatives. We rage against the society that tells us that everyone gets a trophy for participating. No, they don't. Some people are just bad. Some are really, really good. And you know what? That's okay. Progressivism began to worm its way into popular culture and Hollywood around the late 50s, early 60s. And as my friend Bill Whittle of Declaration Entertainment notes, the U.S. used to export positive movies, and they used to celebrate the United States. And now all we see in theaters are foreign-financed movies which bash our culture and our freedoms. Halls of higher learning, like Harvard, was founded to be a Christian-influenced institution. Now they're bastions of progressive indoctrination. They're places where fake Indians like white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Elizabeth Warren can call themselves the first woman of color. Progressives were smart. They saw an opening in the culture and they exploited it, and conservatives have been playing a losing battle trying to get back in. Losing mainly because not enough of us realize the importance of conservatives and culture.